Future of Work, Media, and Research Company. We're going to kick off our discussion in a minute. Just give everyone a brief time to sort of log here and get ready for the discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about the CHRO CISO Playbook, which is about from experimentation to enterprise AI and the partnership between human resources and information security that the best organizations are pursuing. We're going to talk through some practical best practices, some applications, and basically how to navigate and find the balance between the allowing the broader use of AI in organizations and retaining information security and governance and some of the guardrails that are essential, particularly in world-class enterprises. So for those of you who are not familiar with Charter, we're a future of work media and research company, and we are actually, since last year, we're part of the San Francisco Standard. AI and work is one of the central areas that we write about and research, in addition to things including best practices around hybrid and work management, inclusion, and some other areas. So we're gonna kick off the discussion. I'd encourage those of you who are joining us to actually put any comments or questions in the chat. There's also a Q&A function. We're going to talk for about 40-ish minutes. We might pull some of your questions in, but then want to leave time beyond that to actually focus on any questions that you have for our expert speakers today. So, as I said, I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm co-founder and editor-in-chief of Charter, and we're going to talk today about a tension that's playing out inside organizations right now, one that probably doesn't get enough attention. HR teams and employees throughout organizations are racing to use AI, including in functions like hiring, workforce planning, performance management, day-to-day productivity. And the HR teams are on the front lines of getting employees trained on AI and encouraging them to use it more broadly. And then meanwhile, you have security teams who are watching as sensitive data actually flows in tools that they might not have vetted and are having AI models make or suggest decisions without clear audit trails and governance frameworks. So what we're proposing is a different sort of scenario where HR and security work together, and we have two great experts to talk to us about what that can and should like, and talk through some of the areas that organizations need to work through. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we're going to kick off the discussion. To start, we have Ken Cooper. He's the head of human resources at Bloomberg LP. Ken has spent nearly 4 decades at Bloomberg, and he joined the company in 1987 when it was still a startup known as Innovative Market Systems. After serving in other technical and leadership roles, Ken has now led Bloomberg's global HR function for over a decade, and he oversees human resources for more than 26,000 employees across the world. Ken's motto is drive business through Bloomberg's people, one of his mottos. And then I also want to welcome Ken. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I also want to welcome William Varma. He's Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft. William serves in that role. It's a senior advisory role within Microsoft's security solutions area, and he's focused on helping enterprises navigate cloud security, compliance, and AI governance at scale. So he's well positioned to speak to the topic today. In parallel, not a topic we'll cover, but William advises organizations on quantum readiness and quantum safe security, which is a fascinating topic maybe we have you back for. Before Microsoft, William had a career in Big Four consulting and served as Deputy Chief Information Security Officer at a bank and a CISO within government. So William, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For folks who are just joining us again, you're welcome to use the chat, and then also if you have any questions throughout the discussion, there is a Q&A function in Teams where you can put your question in, and we'll pull any questions or comments you have in that way. So William, I want to start with you to kick off the discussion. You work with enterprise clients across industries on cloud security, AI governance. From where you sit, how are the conversations you're having with large organizations shifted in the last 12 to 18 months as AI adoption accelerated? What are some of the key sort of urgent issues that you find yourselves hearing from them?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And it's been quite a journey, hasn't it been? So I still remember 3.5 years ago when the first publicly available LLM, came in, it just created shockwaves across the corporate world. Everybody from cybersecurity, privacy, legal, compliance, risk, all the way to the CEO of the organization. Everyone was worried that what's going to happen if employees start sharing the intellectual property or financial information into those publicly available LLM. And I think back in those days, it sounds like eternity, but it was just 3.5 years ago. Uh, some of the immediate actions a lot of organizations took was block access to those publicly available LLMs, put policies in place, try to socialize those policies with employees. Some were successful, some had bit of a challenging time. Then came the stage two, which is about, you know, understanding that AI is not that bad. If you have the guardrails in place, if you have the governance in place, it can be actually an amazing, accelerator for the business.
Mhm.
And a lot of that push started coming from the business, different lines of business, and that includes CHRO. And security teams started realizing that if they were to be effective in this new era where the bad actors are leveraging AI, security has to leverage AI. So the conversation in the stage two shifted from block everything to no. We got to think about the guardrails and governance, and let's see how we can leverage AI. Where we are right now, sometimes I get invited by my customers to their board for risk management committee, audit committee, and I'm seeing an interesting trend. The board members are now asking the CEO, the CDO, CIO, head of lines of businesses, what are you folks doing in terms of AI adoption? What is your game plan in when it comes to leveraging AI for innovation, cost saving, efficiency, better customer and employee experience? And now all these C-suite is going all the way to the CISO and saying, you know what, our rocket is about to launch. We are ready to, embark on an amazing AI journey. Cybersecurity, are you ready to provide assurance and secure that journey? I think one of the good things that is happening of late is that there is now a good alignment and understanding amongst the technology team, especially the CISO, CIO, CTO, CDOs, that what is so unique about AI. And I'll be happy to talk the details, but I'll leave it in short. The traditional application digital ecosystem followed a deterministic model. When you have an input A, the output is going to be B. You come
Mhm.
back tomorrow again, you have an input A, the output is again going to be B. AI is different. It's probabilistic. It's context driven. And because of that, you have a whole new attack surfaces and categories of threats that have emerged as a result of AI.
Mhm.
The final, sorry, uh, go ahead, please.
Okay, William, that's great. Well, you're going to make a final point, and then we'll go ahead, and then we'll shift to
Yeah,
Ken.
just the final point is, I think where we are, I think communication is key. AI and especially the cyber elements on AI can be pretty technical, and you really have to see what audiences you are communicating with. If you're talking to those amazing folks who are managing the technology in the trenches, you got to talk in those technical jargons. But if you are going to the board or the C-suite for funding or for all the support from different stakeholders, then you got to distill all that language into, I would say, handful of 4 or 5 risks that they can understand and appreciate, and where you can get that support from the C-suite. So I'll take a pause here.
Okay, that's great. There are a bunch of things that I want to come back to, including you mentioned guardrails and governance, and maybe we'll come back to some of the sort of key elements of that. Ken, Bloomberg's platform houses some extremely sensitive financial data. You have a world class, an operation spanning the world, in addition to being world class. What's your experience been as AI tools have entered the picture? How has your role as an HR leader evolved in relation to information security?
So it's a good question. Um, when it comes to our secure customer data, that is completely segregated,
Hmm.
like completely segregated from me and our employees. Which
Hmm.
means if I'm on my computer and using AI for some internal work, there's not even a possibility that it's going to mix in with any of our customer data. It's totally completely walled off. So I don't really think of it in those terms. It's really in the
Yeah.
terms of, okay, our data here, it could be employee data, is usually the most sensitive area where people might get, it might be some projects we're working on. And that's the short answer on how we deal with it. The one thing I'll just say, I'll just get this out of the gate right now, is when we work with our security teams, I think it's really important to have a good, strong, collaborative relationship with them. That that we're working for the same company. We should have a destination that we're aiming for together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be super aggressive and say, I want to go there really fast, take the seatbelt off, and let's go 100 miles an hour. And the security guys go, hold on a second, I'm going to get you there, but put your seatbelt on, all right, and go at the speed limit and make sure you're doing that. But I'm going to get you there, and that's the relationship that we have here, and that I think works really well. Um, so I'll stop at that, and I'll let you ask some more
Yeah.
questions. But the
Ken,
data is
yeah, Ken,
segregated.
just to sort of hone in on something you said there, and I'll ask William for his view also. One of the tensions I think that organizations have is that they have boards and others, and their own kind of strategy involves having more and more employees use AI. And so they're trying to encourage use and adoption, like throughout the organization in a lot of cases. And yet there's the sort of communication and governance and guardrails, um, which are another consideration as well. How do you find what do you find most effective in terms of communicating and configuring things in ways that actually get this sort of engagement that you're looking for while not, you know, driving at high speed with the information security seatbelt, off basically? Is that something that you're confronting? And if it is, like, how do you think about that?
You're asking me, not William, I assume, right?
Yeah, you start, and then I'm interested in what William.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a good question. I mean, let me just back up because you mentioned I've been in the workforce since 1987, and just for the youngsters on this call, in 1987, we didn't even have voicemail. We didn't have phones in our pocket. We didn't have internet. We didn't have email. Like I know that's hard to imagine, but we had none of those, and we still got jobs done. And so I've seen a lot of technological change in my career. The internet, prior to this, the advent of the internet was probably the biggest, but this is now the biggest. This is the most transformational that I've seen. It really, really is. So you're right. There's a desire for people to say, let's do it. Let's try everything. Let's do a million different things. And some companies are literally saying if you're not using AI, it's going to be on your annual review, and we're going to look at that. But I'm not sure what that actually accomplishes, because if you told me on my annual review my stats on ChatGPT are going to be part of it, I'll just fire up ChatGPT every day and just type a bunch of nonsense into it so my stats go up, right? And that doesn't mean I'm getting anything good. It just means that I know how to drive the stats, right? So I think you have to be a little more thoughtful than just saying everybody should use it. Uh, Having said that, we're still in the early days, right? About a year ago, I would say we're in the AOL floppy disk dial-up modem phase of this, comparing it to the internet's
For those who
advent,
remember
right?
that, yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't remember it, ask ChatGPT and or
Yeah.
or or Claude or whatever, and they'll explain it to you. But and I think we're still very much in early days. So on the one hand, I want people to experiment and try a lot of different things. and then see what they come back with. As a matter of fact, I've launched a 100-day sprint within HR called Project Centurion to achieve 100 items in AI. And they're not all organized, but I want it to be a learning experience. Now, how do we do that safely, which is, I think, is your question.
Yeah.
So our security teams have made sure that the tools we use have certain, they're only allowed to use certain tools that they've approved, and there are enough of them, so we have plenty to play around with this, not a problem. And they'll configure it in a way to just ensure that we're not, to make sure we have our seatbelt on. I'll put it that way, right?
Mhm.
So if you're really tinkering around with these things, you may notice that when you have your personal account, it may let you do some things in our professional account. It may not. For example, my history of all my interactions with AI is something I cannot undo on my professional account, right?
Yeah.
Which means someone, if they need to audit it, can audit it. It is not, and William, I defer to your expertise on these things, by the way. But on a personal account on my home computer, yeah, sure, I can. I was looking up something about the New York Yankees, and I don't want someone to see that because they don't like the Yankees. Let's just say, right?
Yeah.
I can delete that. So there are certain guardrails that are in place. I'll finish with this. If I find that those guardrails are too punitive, I will go back to the security guys and go, what are we doing here? Why is it so restrictive? And they may have a really good reason. They'll explain it to me, and I'll go, oh, okay. And maybe they'll rethink it, and they'll go, you know what? You're right. Let's give that a try. And we should just all understand we're working together here. We're learning, right? And rather than do this and point fingers at each other,
Yeah.
let's get to that destination together, and we'll get there. So hopefully that
That's
answered
great.
most of your
Thank you,
question.
Ken. William, I want to ask you this question, that I want to move to some of the questions about HR data that Ken's comments sort of introduce. But William, what are you finding actually works in terms of communicating the need for guardrails and governance while not dampening AI adoption among employees?
Yeah. So, I'm not here to really talk about Microsoft. This is not a brand presentation, but we did something amazing about 3 years ago, and it's called Microsoft Secure Future Initiative. And what that meant was that there is a CISO, and then there are deputy CISOs that are representing different functions within the organization. So this is a groundbreaking governance model, in my opinion, where everybody has a skin in the game, everybody is accountable. Cybersecurity is not just cyber or CISO's responsibility. It's not a technology responsibility. And there is a lot of stuff on internet that's openly available to learn from that. But what it meant was, on a weekly basis, we would evaluate what are the top risks, and those risks could be technology related, it could be business related, it could be coming from HR, and we would solve that risk. Some of you may say, hey, you know what? We are an organization of 500 employees or 1,000 employees. How can we have a CISO and many deputy CISOs? You don't have to be hooked to a jargon. It could be a cybersecurity manager and one representative or a champion from each of those functions. But beyond that, I think when you are allowing the adoption of AI, communication, and governance, I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. To begin with, you have to communicate, what are those, you know, sanctioned official platforms and guardrails that the organization has. The second thing, you have to have an open mind as a cybersecurity professionals, that while cyber might be my number one priority, there are business folks, there are engineers, there are developers who are into the creative business. That's their number one priority. And there is every potential and possibility that they are going to leave the sanctioned platform and create something outside the organization. So your processes has to account for that. How do people come and knock your doors and say, I cannot use the official platform because of such and such genuine reasons? And if that is the case, how do you validate something that is created somewhere else? How do you make sure that it is secure?
Mm.
And after all that you would do, the third option is that people would still go out, people would still spend their corporate credit card and get something that would surprise you.
Yeah.
So your security has to be smart enough to detect the signals at the network level. And when you do that, it's not about going to those folks and policing them and penalizing them. It's really about then having a conversation of what prompted you to go outside, what is that AI doing, what kind of information is it accessing, and then having a conversation around how can we provide assurance to that model. Uh, One thing I feel that, in terms of communication, that cyber awareness sometimes I feel is stuck back in time. Like it's stuck, where things were 10 years ago. You still keep hearing, don't download that attachment, don't click on that link, don't share your credentials again and again, again and again, month after month. Nothing wrong with that. Those are foundational capabilities, those are must have, but people develop immunity to that when they keep hearing the same message without the context. So I think that awareness needs to step up the game and really talk about, hey folks, we are talking about these guardrails and policies for AI, and the reason why we are talking about it is because such and such organization got impacted, this is exactly what happened. Instead of covering different scenarios in that same CBT or awareness session, it's better to just cover one example, but make
Yeah.
sure that that example is connecting with your employees.
Well, and a few things I just take away from your comments. One is that you have these deputy CISOs who are attached to or expert in specialized in a specific area of the business, like a function. So probably like a bit more nuanced understanding of the business needs as opposed to. And then the other thing, the what happens in a lot of organizations, there's a lot of like shadow AI tool use where people just are using kind of whatever they read about. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're monitoring for that use at a network level and then engaging with the employees to actually try and understand why they're using it and maybe probably talk to them about some of the security risks. Let's shift to the HR data question for a
Wait,
minute.
can I just
Yeah,
make a
go
quick
ahead,
comment
Ken.
on that though? Because I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
William brought up a really good point about people, like if you constrict people too much, they're gonna leave the sanctioned platform
Yeah,
anyway. I'm just going to point out that you're not always going to detect that on your network, because if I pull out my phone and I'm working on AT&T's network, you're not going to detect that, right? And now I'm not saying that people should do that, but it is the reality. So one of the challenges I always have when I get told no is, okay, just so you know, 70 surveys seem to show 70% of employees at companies that tell them you can't use certain tools for AI are still using those tools for AI, right? It's a very
yeah,
high number, and so you have to accept that. William clearly gets understands that and is like, all right, what do we do about that, right? Um, but we have to accept that yes, people want to get their jobs done, right? They're not being bad employees. They want to get their jobs done. They want to be efficient. I'll give an example. A news reporter, because we have quite a few of those. They're doing an interview with someone. Now I forgot which tool they're using nowadays if sometimes with the permission of the person interviewed to record the interview, and then the AI will summarize it. And it's now authorized by our security department, but it wasn't day one. And I can guarantee you that we had reporters using it anyway. And why? Because it was easy to download and easy to use, and it made them more effective, more efficient. And something I pointed out to our security and IT teams. I was like, look, you got to figure this out. You got to give them something that they can use legally and or under our auspices, because if you don't, they're going to do it anyway. And I'll give a quick analogy for those who have used computers for at least 20 years now. If anyone remembers the advent of Napster, where you could download music for free, now
Mhm.
that wasn't legal, right, to do, but people did it. And then Apple brilliantly cut a deal with a lot of music companies to create the iTunes store and to sell music at $1 a song. And guess what? People were willing to pay $1 a song to do it appropriately and correctly and legally. And then, of course, Napster got shut down. But even before Napster got shut down, people migrated away from Napster over to the iTunes store because it was easy to use, It was easy to use. It was integrated with their MP3 player, and it was sanctioned, appropriate. It was, you were allowed to use it. It was something that was considered okay. So I think the challenge for the HR department, the tech teams, is to say, look, we've got to give them a solution to the problem. And if we make it so difficult that we're not giving them a solution to the problem, we have great employees. Microsoft has amazing employees. I like to think we do too at Bloomberg, and they want to get their jobs done. They want to be effective, and they're gonna do it anyway. They're gonna use Napster when we told them they're not supposed to. They're gonna do it because that's how they got their job done. So
Yeah.
just my one comment on that.
Well, that's a very empathetic approach to to thinking about it. William, let's talk about HR data for a minute, and um, what are the categories of risk that security teams find most concerning when AI meets HR data?
Yeah, this is an area that is pretty close to me and everybody at Microsoft who is trying to support the AI journey. As I said, when you go deep down into the geeky word, the terminology is going to be very, very different. But we made a conscious effort to go to our global clients across the world, and we said, you know what, irrespective of where you are in that journey, maybe you have just adopted LLMs and you have a nice policy in place. Maybe you are a little bit advanced in your journey. You have AI agents, AI apps, or maybe you are somewhere where we are, which is provisioning AI platforms that others can leverage to build all the cool stuff that AI allows you to do. And so our clients spoke to us across the globe, and we categorize the risk into four different categories. The first one is agent sprawl. The idea is simple. In an organization, if there is an employee that doesn't have an identity, if there is no control over that employee, that the policies have not been delivered to that employee, and that employee can access any information, that will be a disaster. That same challenge is relevant for AI applications and AI agent sprawl as well. If they lack the ownership, if they lack identity and clear access boundaries, if there is over provisioning when it comes to permission of agents and AI apps, it's just going to increase the attack surface and it's going to increase the compliance risk. The
So
second
number
risk
one is agent sprawl.
that's right.
Yeah.
The second risk is data leak and data oversharing. Now, there is a subtle difference between the two. Data leak is about information leaving the organization, knowingly, unknowingly, or through a malicious attack. And one of the simplest example is an employee copying sensitive HR data into a public LLM. And something more complex is an agent that is not validated, that is not tested. An agent is a pretty complex ecosystem. It has MCP servers, APIs, plugins, all that good stuff. And that agent ends up sharing information with external stakeholders. Data oversharing, as I said, is about over provisioning of access. So I, as an employee, have certain role to play, and I'm only allowed to access certain information within this organization. Now, tomorrow, someone creates an AI agent or an AI app that has not been tested properly, and I start using that AI agent, and all of a sudden I have access to way more information than I'm entitled to. And that's oversharing. So that's risk number two. Risk number three is associated with shadow IT, which is a whole different beast itself, and we can go deep down into that, but also the new breed of threats that are emerging. Cybersecurity world has known something called OWASP top 10 forever, last 10, 15, 20 years. And within last 3 years, we have, OWASP top 10 for LLMs and OWASP top 10 for AI agents. So that's risk number three. And risk number four is compliance gap. And this is really the gray area where I think the understanding is really emerging. When it comes to HR, the scope includes, bias regulations, explainability requirement, full auditability of the AI assisted decisions. And you have regulations here and frameworks like EU AI Act. There is a framework that is there in New York State, Illinois, California, that is talking about transparency requirement. And I think this is the trickiest area to conquer because it's not binary, it's not one and zero, and you really need a bit of sophistication of your processes and tools to detect if something is going wrong. I'll take a pause there.
Okay, yeah, and just on the last one, it's basically that there are regulations and rules that you may not be in compliance with using these tools unless you're really on top of it. Ken, can I
Correct.
ask you the same question, which is um, just about where have you found the greatest tension between moving quickly on AI and making sure data stays protected in terms of kind of the HR arena? Are there specific types of
I,
categories
yeah,
of
I mean,
risk or types of
well, I
data
think
that you, yeah.
I think William outlined it really, really well. If you ask me which ones stops us from moving quickly, most quickly, it's probably compliance and regulation
Hmm.
because as Williams pointed out, it's different everywhere you go, and it's complicated. Like tools that we want to use in recruiting, I can use it in one office, I can't use it in another. I might be able to use it in a third, and it's through no fault of our internal people. Our internal people are great. It's because the regulations in all these different areas and what we can do, and we want to do the right thing, can be very, very complicated. The other areas I don't feel slow us down. I think they're real risks. Don't get me wrong. So one that I probably would be most concerned about would be the data oversharing piece. Because imagine if an employee went in and asked the LLM, tell me what Joe's compensation is. Joe's over there, and the LLM said, "Sure, I'll tell you, no problem." Right? Tell me all their personal information. That would, I couldn't think of something much worse than that. As a matter of fact, this, in my mind, it would be worse to expose that to a fellow employee than for a hacker to get a hold of it. To be honest with you, the hacker is somewhat anonymous, and I'm not saying it's okay for a hacker to get a hold of it. It's not, but the repercussions of that data oversharing, I think, would be pretty big. Having said that, I think we have great look. I think we have great teams here. Our security team is great. Our IT teams are great, and they don't slow us down, right? They just make sure we travel with our seatbelts on at the right speed limit, but they don't slow us down on that. The one though that does slow us down is the compliance, the risk, and all, I'm sorry to say, all different locales want to make a name for themselves. They pass some new law and they don't really think through the business consequences all the time or often. And then you have this patchwork of regulation that you're dealing with around the world, which makes it really challenging.
And that's things like being able to audit bias in hiring systems and things like that. And
Exactly, right?
yeah,
Like, there are rules about if you're using any automated tools during the interview process, and you absolutely should. Don't get me wrong, you absolutely should make sure that there's no bias in the middle. But when you to comply with the rule in New York City is different than complying with the rule in San Francisco, which is different than complying with the rule in EMEA, which is different than the rule in India. It becomes very convoluted and complicated to deal with. And the reality is when someone says, well, you can't have a machine do any kind of filtering or sorting because it might have bias, and it might, and that's a real problem. But guess what? Human beings also have bias when they look at resumes and when they interview people. And I can't as easily deal with that. When a computer is doing it, we can test it, we can detect it, and we can do something about it. It's much harder on the human side. So I think we need to be practical and pragmatic as well. But having all that patchwork of legislation around the world makes it complicated, and
mm,
it's
yeah.
hard to deal with.
And hopefully that evolves in a way that's easier for companies.
I wouldn't
William,
count on it. Just
William,
saying.
can you share an example of what effective HR security collaboration has looked like? Like what made it work either, in your own organization or a client organization?
Uh, I think uh, it really starts with instead of uh, blocking that time with HR for that meeting. Um, it's really about what problem are we trying to solve with HR. So it's about recognition of that problem and an effective way, and I like to use the term called risk as a service. So back in my CISO days, I launched a function called risk as a service, and what it means is whether it's HR or any other lines of business, if they have that aha moment and they want to you know give shape to that new idea in the form of a digital solution, and that might be AI, then security needs to be in that discussion forum right at that stage of inception of idea. That's when the business architects, the solution architects, technology architects, and cybersecurity architects, they are all talking about how can we have a good solution that will cater to the needs of employees, customers, but at the same time that has got security built into it by design rather than bolted it in the end. So that is one. And the other thing is really about making sure that people understand what are the data residency issue. When it comes to training data transparency gap, what are the expectations around that? And when it comes to communicating with HR, I think when you are embarking on the journey of finding a new product for HR, it could be a hiring software or a performance management software. The time has come that you move away from that traditional approach of 500-line Excel spreadsheet and yay and nay against each and every question. It's really about, an era where you need to have compact, a lot more focused conversation, but questions that are tangible, that really provide assurance to what the business, including the HR, is trying to do, and that supports that business objective, including in this case the HR's objective.
And the 500 line sheet is just the sort of security checklist for whatever
Yeah,
solution. Okay.
yeah, that's an era that existed maybe 5-10 years ago. I think for all the right reasons, the supply chain assurance has really evolved.
Yeah.
The checklists are a lot more compact. Organizations are relying a lot more on cybersecurity certifications like SOC 2, ISO, and the questions are very relevant. So if it is HR, the non-negotiables are really about data residency, training data governance, audit trails, explainability, what about model drift monitoring? And you double down on those meaningful questions rather than working
The
with that
exhaustive
quantity of
list.
exhaustive
Yeah,
list.
that makes sense. Ken, what do you have an example of what effective HR security collaboration has looked like? What made it
Well,
work?
um, I think it's more along the lines of what I've been saying. If you're looking for something specific, we're working right now on changing over. I mean, a lot of companies have done this to all the companies will call it Ask HR interface, where
Mhm.
you're with a chat to ask HR questions, and the security team is absolutely there to, as I've said, to make sure we have our seatbelts on. So what we've done is we've trained the AI, we ask the questions, and then we look at how it's responding. And from my viewpoint, I want to make sure that there's no answers that are dangerous. An answer of I don't know the answer. Click here to get human interaction is perfectly fine. That's not dangerous.
Yeah.
An answer that's kind of wrong but is not terrible is also okay. And what we found, so the bar is there, and And the security team understood that, and they were fine. Then this was on general information. This wasn't on deep-seated data or anything like that, and that makes it a little easier as well. Information employees might ask, what benefits are available for physical therapy, for example, and you want to give that to them easily. But there's no great risk there, right? It gets riskier when you're talking about some important personal data and things like that. So that's where we'll take the balance. But that's how we operate with them. They're there at the table with us as we're doing it, and we just move ahead.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Are you? I want to pause for a second and we have a few questions that are coming in, so we'll shift over to them in a minute. And I just encourage anybody who's listening, if you have some questions, we can pull them in, just type them in the chat. What you both are, with working with organizations with organizations that are at enterprise scale, some global reach. Um, what for organizations that are maybe earlier in their journey and maybe not at the same scale of a Microsoft or a Bloomberg, do you have any advice? And William, maybe I'll start with you for frameworks or kind of the minimum structure that they should put in place before deploying HR in things that touch human resources functions.
Yeah, I think in any journey, I think you got to be asking the broader questions. Uh, what AI is going to achieve, what information or data is it going to access, uh, you know, what is that view of those data sources, sensitivity level, permissions will look like. Who is going to use that? Is it just employees? Is it external stakeholders? Is it the customers? And then to the bare minimum to begin with is, do we have that governance and oversight in place? Do we have the policies, guardrails? Is there a way to get monitoring, visibility, and accountability into what we are trying to achieve? Uh, there's a whole array of security frameworks and security controls that you can implement. But just because the frameworks exist doesn't mean that you just blindly start plowing through them A to Z. I mean, at the end of the day, the conversation should start with information and data that is engaged, and that will decide the risk level. You need to understand that digital model that you are enabling, who are your consumers of that AI. And once you have that clarity, I think from the governance perspective here at Microsoft, we again and again tell our customers to focus on 5 or 6 areas. The first one is registry, which means that when I, as an employee, join an organization, I've got an employee ID and there is a single source of truth where my records are available. That same philosophy is true for AI as well. If you don't have an accounted AI, and if there is no owner, if there is no policy assigned to AI, that's a rogue AI. And the consequences can be dangerous. The second area is access control. Again, very similar analogy as an employee. When I join in an organization, there is entitlement management. I get permissions assigned. Over the period of time, I might get promoted, I might change roles, so I might have more access to information or less access to information. And that is constantly validated. And at some point, I might leave the organization or I might retire. And AI is going to go through exactly the same thing. So you need to have all those governance mechanisms around access control for your AI as well. The third area is visualization. And this is something very close to my heart because uh, anything can have a lot of hype. Some people might say AI is going to do unbelievable things, and Terminator, if you have seen that movie, it is a
Yeah.
reality right now. And some people might, on the extreme other end of the pendulum, might say, nah, it's not there yet. And I think the reality is really somewhere in between. So there got to be a mechanism for business to validate, if we design this AI to accomplish 5 business tasks, is it really accomplishing it? What is how is it trending with employees? What's the feedback we are getting? And the same visualization you need from IT, from cybersecurity, from compliance. Then there is interoperability, and then finally there is security. And security is really a loaded area, but you need to accomplish these at the top governance layer before you
Mm,
can move deeper into the security arena.
great. And do you have anything to add for organizations that are maybe less sophisticated technically and smaller and or maybe at an earlier phase than Bloomberg is
Well,
in terms
I
of
worked at one of those companies when I started here. We were always technically sophisticated, but we were much smaller. And I I would focus on the first thing that William talked about was the data piece. You know, the questions you have to ask, because if the data that you're looking to either manipulate or use with AI is fairly benign data, that's you're going to take a different approach. And again, I would talk to my security expert on this, but you might take a different approach than if it was, say,
Mhm.
employee data, right?
Yeah.
So, like the example I gave earlier, Bloomberg benefits data, it's not the crown jewels here, right? It's not the massive secrets that have to be protected.
And
What I really
that's
want.
like what details if I have a question about my 401k eligibility or
Exactly. Well,
benefits or
if it's specific on what's in your personal 401k, I would make a
yeah,
distinction between that and what's our plan and what's our
a
program and how does
general
it work,
question.
which is a more
Yeah.
general, generic thing, and that's where I would separate it out. But if it's a more of a generic, yeah, if that got released on Wikipedia, I'm not going to lose a minute's worth of sleep
Yeah.
over that, right? However, if it was your personal data and your personal informations, that would be different. I guess my advice there would be, if I was a small company with somewhat limited resources, I might start focusing on just, and I remember, because was us. We we had limited resources and limited cash, and we were really focusing on how do we, and this was in 1987, how do we use technology to make ourselves more efficient and more productive at work? And I think there's plenty you can do with AI in there that doesn't come close to security issues.
Mhm.
Just making yourself more productive and how you consume information. Even, I get the most common easy use. You get a long threaded email, and you're just like, all right, do I spend 5 minutes reading this, or do I just dump this in AI and have it summarize it for me, right?
Yeah.
And yes, I'm making a judgment on somebody's LLM has just read my email. Do I really care that much about that? I'll be honest, no. In virtually every case, because it's not that. Again, it's not the secrets to how to get the crown jewels. It's there. It's more benign than that. And so I think if I had a small company, the first thing I would do is just, how do we use tools to leverage our workforce to be as productive as possible? Because we can't keep hiring people, right? I got 5 people in my startup. How do I make those 5 people as productive as possible? How do I get them a tool? There are a number of tools out there that are great at helping you make PowerPoints. You can make an amazing PowerPoint in 5 minutes that used to take you 3 hours. Wow, you just saved 3 hours. And again, you're probably not giving away the most secret information at that point. And frankly, if I was and I was in that startup, if I was in a startup that might not be in business a year from now because we may not have the cash flow, I'm not sure I would be as worried about that
You would take
as
that trade-off. Yeah.
I would take that trade-off. I would say, I got to get the stuff out and get it done. Um,
Yeah.
and and if someone learns this thing, again, what's the data? What's the data that they're learning? That's the question.
Yeah.
That's how I see
Let
it.
me, that's great. So we have a few questions I want to get to. One of them from Roy Vela asks, how can we manage out of band off-platform interactions, explosion of devices like Limitless or Plot and apps like Granola will record and transcribe all interactions for AI manipulation afterwards? How do we manage, track, know about that? And I think the references are to, and I see this in San Francisco, sometimes people have devices that you don't realize initially, but are actually recording everything that you might say to them. as these devices become more ubiquitous and consumer software platforms like Granola are recording things off platform, how do you approach that? Ken, maybe you can start and then
Could
we'll
I
go to
start from
William.
an HR? Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah,
let me start from it because I'm not sure. I mean, if I was in William's shoes, I'm not sure how you track stuff that's not on your network or anything. And maybe
yeah,
William has an answer to that. But my HR answer would be that comes down to expectations of your employee behavior and professionalism, which goes beyond technology, by the way, right? Like if I do something that's unprofessional or doesn't represent Bloomberg well in any way, shape, or form, um, that reflects on the company because of who I am, regardless. So we obviously will set expectations for employees on what they can do. So one small example is for years, long before AI, we do not allow the recording of conversations in the office. Okay. Um, that's our policy.
yeah.
Does it mean, can I guarantee that people won't violate that? No, I can't guarantee. But if you just make sure your values are repeated amongst your employees and people know it, you hope that most people will follow that.
And
So that's
that,
on the
Ken, just
one.
to be clear,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
employee recordings of employee conversations in the office is what you're
Right.
referring to. Yeah,
Yes, that's exactly right. So, but on the other hand, I think we also do have to recognize that if we make life so difficult for people, I'll tell you a quick anecdote, which has nothing to do with AI, but this is a perfect employee behavior example. So years ago, and I'm going back now 25 years ago at Bloomberg, if someone called the main number at Bloomberg for Ken Cooper and they didn't know my phone number, the receptionist would page overhead. There would be an overhead page that would go throughout the office saying, Ken Cooper, please call reception. We have someone on the line. And when we were small and we didn't have technology to forward phone calls and all that, it wasn't a big deal. But what happened was over the years, every 30 seconds, there was a page overhead. And it became quite, I mean, this is going to sound small, but it's an important point on employee behavior. It became very irritating. And I was in engineering writing code at the time. Imagine if you're writing code and every 30 seconds you're hearing overhead this page. It doesn't
yeah,
help your concentration. So what I noticed was one of the speakers overhead wasn't working. And the reason it wasn't working is because at night, a couple of the employees went up, unscrewed the speaker, and cut the wire so that it wouldn't be making the noise. And why did they do that? They did that because no one listened to their complaints. No one sat there and said, there's a
mhm,
better way to do this. Let's fix the problem. So they took the matter into their own hands. And that I use that. I was not in HR at the time, I was in engineering, to go to HR and say, you have to fix this. If our
yeah,
employees are so desperate, and what are they desperate to do? To get their job done. That's what they're
yeah,
desperate to do. And you're stopping them from doing it, and you're not giving them a mechanism you have to. And of course, by then there was an easy technological fix, and they stopped paging overhead, and that was that. So I think we also have to recognize that if you make life so difficult for people, and they
yeah,
want to do their jobs, and most people do want to do their jobs, and they want to do a good job, they're going to figure out a way, and you have to understand what those things are. So one of the things, I'll just finish with this, that I do is we have an outdoor lunch area. People know me by name, but a lot of people don't know me by face. So during the summer, I'll grab my lunch. I'll sit in with a bunch of employees. I'll see some employees chatting, and I'll say, "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit with you?" And they say, "Sure." And then I listen to what their conversation is, and then I start talking to them. And then usually 5 or 10 minutes in, I introduce myself. But what I learn is a lot of what's going on underneath,
yeah,
because then they open up and they'll just tell me what they're doing that maybe our CISO team doesn't know what they're doing, or
yeah.
other people are doing. And I see that behavior all the time. And it's from people who want to get their jobs done and do a
That
good
makes
job.
sense. Ken, do you still not allow, because one of the issues that a lot of companies are grappling with is recording of meetings and transcription, which is actually a function that's very easy to turn on, and in some places turn on automatically in the Zoom or Teams platforms. Is that something you still don't
No, we
allow?
do. We do.
Okay.
It was a little bit of a fight on my part to make it go live because there were some old timers who were resisting it. And I pointed out to them that you can resist it all you want, but I'm recording us on our phone right now, and take me to the head of HR if you want, because here he is, right? And sometimes I think you have to push. So yes, we do, and then we can summarize and do all those things. So we are pushing on those things. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for explaining that. We just have a few quick minutes, and I'm going to we have another question from Aruna Rawat, and William, maybe I'll give this one to you. It's a pretty broad, high-level question. Any recommendations on what to use to measure AI risk posture? How do you respond?
So that's a great question. And I'm glad that this question is centered around risk. And this is my message to all my, the conversations that I'm having. Don't focus on impulsive decision making. Don't focus on products. Don't gravitate towards just one area of measuring risk and ignore other areas. I interact with some amazing people, some really brilliant people who have some amazing ideas. But oftentimes, one of the challenges that they start addressing AI with just one facet. It could be identity related controls or data security related controls. And some people go all the way to buying that new shiny product, cybersecurity solution that they perceive is going to magically solve all their problems. I think the key is that identify what's your landscape, what your AI usage is, identify the risks that are associated with your organization, and really embark on a program that begins with governance. I talked about 5, 6 facets of governance, and that includes registry, access control, visualization, interoperability, and then move into the security piece. Security piece, again, there is no one area that you can address the complete AI security. You need to take care of securing the identities that is associated with AI. You need to address the data security piece. You need to address things like red teaming, AI agent vulnerability management. And then, like anything else, things are going to slip, and you will have to bank on the detection and monitoring, and in the end, compliance management. So, in all these facets of the security pieces that I've talked about, again, start your journey with visibility, the posture management, any issues with configuration, any vulnerabilities that you are noting, solve those, understand how the bad actors could exploit or access those gaps or configuration gaps or vulnerabilities, and then move into the deeper areas. So have that holistic program, and that would be my message.
Great. I'm going to ask you, we just have a minute left, just in a few sentences, each of you, any last advice. We've been talking about the CHRO or HR and information security partnership around AI. Do you have any last advice? And we just have a minute. So very briefly, Ken, start with you.
I mean, for sure, work together, and make sure that, you're aligned on the objective and where you're going. And the second thing I'd say is, play around and experiment, and you can do that in a safe way, right? You can do that off your corporate network on your home computer with no corporate data whatsoever, right? So there's things, if you're really itching to experiment, you could do that very safely and get advice from your CISO team on how to do that. But make sure you partner and have a common goal is what my advice would be.
You can use AI to follow the Yankees and predict their outcomes.
I don't think it's going to be a good season for us, but I will be watching tonight.
You don't need AI for that.
No.
William, just a last thought before we close.
Sure. My suggestion is bring your CHRO and CISO together and do one thing. Build a shared inventory of every AI use case currently touching employee data, because this should not be about strategy deck. It should be about having that real list. What AI tools are in use? What employee data are they accessing? And which have had any security or compliance review at all, if that was done. That inventory will immediately surface your highest risk gaps, because I think we all know that you cannot govern what you cannot see. So
Yeah,
start with that and then start conquering that AI
great.
journey.
Great. William, those are great words to end on. So I want to thank William Varma from Microsoft and Ken Cooper from Bloomberg for this great discussion today. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor-in-chief of Charter, the future of work media and research company. We hope you'll join us for another conversation before too long as well. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, William.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.